Now in this video, we will begin with our animal sketches. Now I've selected one of the images from my photo reference, and I'm going to place it here on the side. And on a new layer, what we're going to begin with first is a gesture drawing. Now the first thing I'm also going to do is make sure that my brush is exactly the way I want it to be. I like to have my shape dynamics on. I like to have the dual brush on, so have a nice sketch to it. That way when I have my shape dynamics, I can have my thick and thin line, and this is really good because especially when you are sketching from life, you want to have that variation in your line quality when you're drawing. Now, a gesture drawing is essentially a very quick drawing where you try to capture the movement and fluidity of the animal of the animal body. So, for example, if I was drawing from life, my animals, they move so fast. For example, if I was drawing a goat, goats have a tendency to jump around everywhere. So I would be creating these very quick, sketches that would be, last no longer than just a few seconds up to a few minutes, the maximum maybe being like 3 or 5 minutes. And what I'm doing essentially is trying to capture the action, trying to capture the essence of that movement that the animal is doing. Now, these kind of quick drawings, these gesture drawings, they can also be used or considered to be warm-up sketches that you do before you start your actual drawings. Because what a gesture drawing does is that it gets your mind thinking, it gets your mind moving, and also helps you to kind of draw much more loosely and much more quickly so that you get as much information as possible in as little as time. And these gestures are very important when it comes to showing that movement, especially when it comes to doing animals. So, trying to master this as much as you can would be very beneficial to your abilities. Now, another thing to think about in addition to the movement is to think about the weight of the character. Now, as you look at the pose that I'm drawing here, one of the first things I did was try to pay attention right away on where the animal is kind of leaning toward. You want to show a good sense of weight. This can be very tricky, but it will really add a lot of believability to your drawing. It doesn't necessarily show you or mean how heavy the animal is, but which part of the animal carries the most weight. Are the back legs more tense? Are the front legs more relaxed? If the animal is lying down on its side, then where is the weight situated? Is it like more toward the back? Is it more toward the front? And these are, a few things to think about, before you approach your animal sketch, just to try and understand where things are. Now, using our next reference photo of our bear that's sitting very cutely, I just love this pose because it looks like he's kind of looking off at something very longingly. But one of the things I want you to focus on is understanding the line of action. What the line of action is it can be summed up as being this one loose line that describes the entire pose. And as you can see by the line that I drew there, it's essentially kind of the foundation, the basis. It's a good way for me to start my drawing because it allows me to block my main pose down. And just by doing that one line, I was able to get like a real understanding of the movement, of in which direction the body is shifted in which poses or which perspective his limbs are at. And this is a really good way for me to understand how to think of the body as a whole, and it also keeps me very loose as I'm drawing. Notice I'm just really using only one line to show an indication of where things are. Try not to make your drawing too messy and second guess yourself, right? Like the more lines there are on the piece of paper, the more unsure of yourself you are. So really think about it before you actually lay down that line of action. Pay attention to the pose that you're looking at. We have another photo reference here, and notice that when I'm drawing, I really kind of think hard before I lay down a line. Notice how I'm moving my brush over and over in the same place, and then I kind of put down my stroke. Because what I'm doing is when I'm drawing I'm thinking as well as doing, but at the same time, you don't want to do before you think, if that makes sense. When I'm kind of hovering my pen over, the canvas like this, I'm trying to understand in which direction to put a line. So, allow yourself that time to think before you actually put down a line or a gesture. And in that split second of thinking, what you're doing is is that you're focusing on the photo reference in front of you. You're focusing on that photo reference, and you're laying down that very straight line there. It's a very confident line too, right? The more you think before you put down a line shows a little more confidence in your line work. So that's what I'm trying to embody. That's what I'm trying to do when I hesitate before putting down any kind of a line on my sketch. Now, when you finish with your gesture drawing like I just did, the next step is to create a new layer. Lower the opacity of the one that you just drew on so that it's not as vivid. And on the new layer, start drawing and understanding your character. This is pretty much before the actual anatomy stage, of design. Now, what I'm doing is I'm breaking my bear down into shapes. As you see, in the reference image, there's certain kind of very definitive shapes, right? He's got a large circle for his face. His snout is this very rectangular shape, triangular shape, and his ears are very pointed. His face can be divided into two semicircles. I'm breaking him down, I'm dissecting him, I'm understanding him. So when you're drawing, be sure to kind of break down your character into those shapes. This will also really help you understand where the lighting will hit. And by adding this kind of dimension, you're able to get a better understanding of perspective. Also, your drawings won't feel as flat. This is very important when it comes to doing any kind of animal sketching, especially because our animals, they tend to be so layered, right? When you look at humans right up front, you see a human, you see all of us, right? You see our face, you see our neck at the bottom, you see our torso, legs, etc. But sometimes when you look at an animal straight on, because they're four-legged, you kind of see the head first, and then behind them you see the big back, and then you see their 2 feet in the foreground. So this all matters. There's like an overlapping of shapes, an overlapping of layers. There's foreshortening that's happening. So that's why it's very important to understand how to break down your animals into shapes. And this is something that Joe Weatherly, the artist, emphasizes in his drawing book. In the previous video, I recommended his book for anatomy. So he really breaks down this process of creating shapes to understand your characters. And eventually, after you kind of break down your character into understanding it into shapes, is kind of when you start adding in the anatomy. The ideal place that you want to be in is that when you're sketching, is that your gesture, your breaking down of shapes, and your anatomy all comes out in one drawing, in one go, because you have such a strong understanding of your animal. Right now I'm breaking it down into steps and showing you, right? I'm breaking it down into gesture, then I'm showing you shapes, eventually I'll show you anatomy. That is the step-by-step process. But the place that you want to be at is when you are able to do all three at once. And that's when you're going to have a really strong drawing. If you have to draw over your photo reference to understand the line of action or to break down your character into shapes, please go ahead and do that. That is something I also did when I first started out with drawing. It's a very helpful way to break down your character. Now, in the next part of the sketching, what I want to Now, I'm just going to quickly show you, how when I personally go ahead and sketch out my bear characters, how I just try to understand where the anatomy is in his body as I'm sketching. I understand that, right here is his leg. What I'm doing is I'm drawing his big paw on the right, his front paw that's leaning over his foot at the bottom. And I've just drawn out this big paw, right? This big leg. And what I have to do is I'm going to try and understand the breakdown of how this shape is working. And I'm doing this very slowly for you so that you will understand what I'm thinking whenever I sketch and draw this out. So once you finished, or once I finished with my gesture drawing, the next step is to break it down into shapes. Now I've drawn in my line of action, and now within that, what I'm going to draw is shapes, is circles, is lines to help me figure out the breakdown, to help me understand this paw, this leg better. This essentially to me is a cylinder, and I need to understand that as I'm drawing. So I'm going to do that breakdown for you, just to explain what I'm thinking whenever I approach this sketch. Now on the left, I have much darker lines to show that that side is facing away from me. I can't really see that. And now as I'm drawing the leg, as you can see, it's kind of receding toward the top and leaning toward the left. Those lines that I have going across horizontally give an indication of the perspective of the leg. And I'm breaking this down within the actual paw, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding in the muscle mass, adding in the bones that are going to be in this very big paw. I'm just going to emphasize those horizontal lines a little more. And the reason I'm doing this is for my own understanding, and it's to also help you understand the direction that the leg is going to be on. That's very important. That really helps me not have a flat drawing. When I initially drew the gesture of the paw, right, it felt very flat. But by breaking it down right now into this long kind of tube-like shape, I'm able to really understand the structure of this leg. Now, as I'm drawing the shapes, I've pulled out that image again that I had in the previous video of the anatomy of the bear, and I've just cut out that one part of the leg. And now I'm zooming in to really kind of pay attention to understand those little bones that are in his paw, that muscle structure that is going to be within that shape. I'm going to kind of break it down for you. And I don't always do this when I sketch. Like I said before, it's kind of a mixture of the gesture, the shape, and the anatomy all in one. But this breakdown is something that you should have in your head when you're drawing the animals. The more you draw them, the better the understanding is, and the next set of drawings to come will have this knowledge in them. So you don't always have to break down your characters when you are doing this. This is just something that you will have for your reference in your mind as you're sketching it out. And the more sketches you do, the better and faster you will be at this. Now, the bones that I'm drawing in this particular case are the radius and the ulna. And I'm just drawing them within my structure, within my shape that I had. And notice how the bone isn't perfectly straight, right? I'm kind of drawn it slightly curvy, and I'm paying attention to the angles that I drew earlier when I was drawing out my shapes and the directions that the angles were in. So that's why, again, this prevents my drawing from being too flat. Now, once you're at a place that you're happy with, that you've kind of gotten down the basic bone structure in there, let's go ahead and add in a light layer of muscle mass to our sketch as well. And this is, again, I cut out just the muscle part from the previous image that I had of the bear anatomy, and I'm just putting that muscle structure next to my sketch. And I'm going ahead and paying attention to where that muscle is overlapping on the bones, so that when I am actually sketching my character, in another time, that sketch, I will be thinking about this muscle mass. I'll think about how I would show that when I'm laying down any line work. So that is how it'll all come together eventually. So once you keep practicing at this and really working at understanding where things are, you can eventually bring them all together, and it'll make sense. It'll make your drawing more believable. On the next video, I'm going to take all the techniques that we have learned in these previous 3 videos and apply them in a way that I will start adding in a little more shadow and highlight to our characters. This is just creating a very loose, quick definition of what your bear sketch could look like. We're kind of creating a blueprint, right? So we finished with doing the gesture, we added the shapes, we're doing the anatomy, and now this is the final layer. This is like the top filter that you would add to your final sketch adding in that bit of highlight, adding in that bit of tone, and this really starts bringing your character to life. So that is what we will focus on in the next video.